Today I want to talk about a question war poets kept coming back to. What's the difference between the war we're told to imagine and the war people actually lived? The First World War ended in 1918, but I found 5 poems written between 1914 and 1925 that kept wrestling with that question well after the fighting stopped. We told war through statues and speeches, glory, duty, sacrifice. These 5 poems ask what got left out of that story. Some were written from the trenches. Some were written years later, still working through what the war had cost. Together, they pushed us back against the idea that war has one true image. Ford Madox Ford wrote Antwerp in 1915, about the fall of the city the previous October. It follows the ordinary miners and laborers who died defending it, then asks how they compared to the legendary heroes of old wars, the ones who ride by their horses forever through our brains. The poem doesn't end on the battlefield. It ends at a train station in London, where mothers dressed in mourning black wait for soldiers who will never arrive. Ford writes, "This is Charing Cross. It is midnight. There is a great crowd and no light. A great crowd, all black, that hardly whispers aloud. They await the lost who lie dead in the trench and barrier and fosse." An old word for ditch. In the dark of night, there is so much pain. Hamilton Sorley wrote to Germany in 1914, months before he enlisted. It's a sonnet, but it refuses to use the form the way sonnets usually work in wartime, praising love, honor, or country. Instead, Sorley writes to the enemy directly and says both sides are equally blind. "You are blind like us. Your hurt no man designed. And the blind fight the blind." Sorley was killed in action the following year at just 20 years old. Richard Aldington wrote Field Manœuvres sometime during his active service between 1916 and 1918. The speaker is a soldier on outpost duty, rifle loaded with blanks, waiting for a line of enemy soldiers to march by so he can fire after they've passed. His mind isn't on the war at all. He notices the grass, the pine trees, a finch's wings, and finally, thoughts of a woman far away. "My lips murmur of the mother of beauty, standing breast high in golden broom, among the English pine woods." For a quiet moment, beauty wins out over duty. Rosenberg wrote this poem in 1914 from Cape Town, South Africa, where he heard the news of the war from an ocean away, before he had even enlisted. War doesn't arrive as battle or army. It arrives as something unnatural. "Snow is a strange white bird. This summer land doth know. No man knows why." Snow falling out of season becomes his only way to describe a wrongness he can't yet name. By the final stanzas, the poem turns almost biblical. Red fangs have torn his face. God's blood is shed. War arrives here as a wound in the world itself. The last poem jumps forward to 1925, 7 years after the war ended. Countee Cullen, one of the leading poets of the Harlem Renaissance, wrote this elegy for Colonel Charles Young, the highest-ranking black officer in the American Army. When the United States entered the war, Young was forced into medical retirement, widely understood as a way to keep him from commanding white officers in combat. To prove he was fit for duty, Young rode nearly 500 miles on horseback from Ohio to Washington, D.C. The Army still refused him. Cullen's poem answers that injustice, and all the honeyed lies they'd tell come there to thirst and die. From your rich dust and slaughtered will, a tree with tongues will grow. The heroic story of war didn't have room for anyone who earned a place in it, and Cullen names exactly who got left out. To bring these poems into the classroom, I built a jigsaw activity. Students split into 4 expert groups, 1 per poem, and each group works out what type of poem they have, where it lands on our big question, and which line proves it. Then each group teaches the rest of the class what they found. Antwerp, the longest poem, becomes a challenge option for students ready for more. By the end, the whole class has to answer one question together. How do these poems disagree about what war is? This activity works in both an English and a social studies classroom, and that's by design. On the English side, RH 11 through 12-9 asks students to integrate diverse sources into one coherent understanding, while noting where those sources disagree. On the social studies side, Iowa's Inquiry Standard SS 9 through 12-8 asks them to construct explanations with reasoning and evidence. The poems function as primary sources, and building an argument from them is the goal. For a 9th or 10th grade classroom, or a different format, the alternatives are on the screen. So do I recommend these 5 poems? Completely. They're short enough to teach in a single class period, and old enough to be free and easy to find. And they're honest enough to start real conversations. Between Ford's Grieving Mothers, Sorley's Letter to the Enemy, Aldington's Daydreaming Soldier, Rosenberg's Summer Snow, and Cullen's Tree with Tongues, students get 5 very different answers to the same question, and the space to build their own 6th. Thanks for listening. See you next time.